I'm Patti Jordan, and welcome to the WCA Leadership Interview Project. We're here today with the renowned art historian and curator, Barbara Wolanin, who will share her thoughts and experiences as leadership in the Women's Caucus for Art. Dr. Wolanin is being interviewed as part of the WCA Leadership Interview Project in conjunction with WCA's 50th anniversary. Thank you for taking the time today to join us for this interview, Dr. Wolanin.
Welcome.
Let me briefly introduce you. Dr. Wolanin is a longtime member of the Women's Caucus for Art and has been quite active in WCA's Washington, D.C. chapter. She's also served on WCA's national board. She held the distinguished position of curator for the Architect of the Capitol in Congress from 1985 to 2015 and is now curator emerita. She holds a bachelor's in studio art and master's degree in art history from Oberlin College, an MAT in art education from Harvard University, and a PhD in art history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She was a Woodrow Wilson Fellow, a Kress Fellow from University Wisconsin-Madison, and a Smithsonian Fellow. So, Dr. Wolanin, let's go back in time a bit, if you will. You joined the Women's Caucus for Art, WCA, back in 1978, only a few years after its founding in 1972.
Well, I had been a member of the College Art Association, and I wish I had been at that founding meeting in 1972, but I had just had my first child, so I was not at that meeting. But I did go and see the wonderful art exhibition of women artists. It was in Los Angeles in 78. That was just mind-blowing. That was done by leaders of the Women's Caucus, Linda Nochlin and Sutherland Harris. And then that's when I think I joined WCA, and then I got a job teaching at a women's college. And that was a time when there was not one single woman in any of the art history survey books, not one single one. And I was teaching women. So I started bringing in all the new books that were coming out on women artists, having the students read those, do their essays and their papers and things on women. So then that year, the College Art Association and Women's Caucus for Art was going to meet in Washington. And I was asked to create an exhibition of a woman artist at my little college. And that was, I had to get panels bought to even put the pictures on, but I did a exhibition of a woman photographer, Frances Benjamin Johnson, and my little exhibition was one of 44 exhibitions that they were able to prepare for that groundbreaking conference. And of course, that was the time that the first Lifetime Achievement Awards were awarded in the White House and at the conference. And I don't know, I didn't get to that conference probably because of my teaching load, which I'm very sorry about, because it was so inspiring, the whole idea of it, that we could give, as one of the WCA presidents used to say, this is the Academy Awards for women artists. And that was started in 1979.
That truly is groundbreaking. Wow.
So then I did go to one WCA meeting. It was there was a chapter that was started at the Washington Women's Art Center, which was an amazing place that apparently there were 800 women that were members over the lifetime of it. And a lot of the members of the DC chapter ended up having been involved with at Washington Women's Art Center. And Charlotte Robinson, who was one of the people that spearheaded the conference and the award ceremony, was based there. She had been teaching courses there. And so that the WCA, a lot of very important things grew out of that Washington Women's Art Center. Some of the leaders, particularly in Washington, and that then helped get the chapter really going. Mary Garrett is, teaching at American University. She got the College Art Association agree to make an affiliated society to get it incorporated and everything. And so a lot of it, the organization really launched in Washington.
That's truly so informative for all of us.
2001, I got the chapter, the Maggie Ama, who was the national president, and I was the chapter president, said, I want you to do an award ceremony for local women. Okay. And she would come, and she came. So we did the award ceremony, and we also did a exhibition at a new art center called the Millennium Arts Center. And actually we did 5 exhibitions, and one of them was about the Washington Women's Art Center, that women that were current members had their current work and work they had shown there in the art center, which was in the 70s and early 80s. And then American University in 2018 was going to do an exhibition about the Washington Women's Art Center. And I called the director and I said, well, who do you have writing the history? And he says, oh, we don't have anybody writing the history. And I remember there was one woman way back in 2001 that had wanted to do the history. I called her and we volunteered and co-wrote the history of the Washington Women's Art Center that had never been written, and something I'm really proud of. And it's very closely connected to WCA.
So really, so much has happened in that region, in the DC region.
Mm-hmm. But with so 25 years later, so the chapter sort of disappeared in DC, and in 1990, the conference was going to be in DC again. And so Marilyn Banner and Alice Sims, who agreed to co-chair the conference, called for people that wanted to help with it. And I went to it, and there was this huge room of people all wanting to volunteer. It was really great. So I got on the exhibition committee, and I ended up during the national exhibition for the conference, and helped push to try to get the award ceremony at the National Museum of Women and the Arts, which was very new, and they were resisting at first. We finally got them to agree to do that, which was obviously the logical place for it. So that was a wonderful conference. And that's when the chapter really became organized, and it's been going since then, really since 1991. And then I got involved. And then, of course, at one point, it's like, well, we have to have a president or the chapter can't continue. So I agreed to be president, even though I was very busy with my job. So that's how. And even before that, I had started something I'm still doing for the chapter, which we called Art Chats, getting people to go out to different museums and galleries and see and discuss the art, which is I enjoy as an art historian. So we're still doing that.
You were a pioneer for the Women's Caucus of Art, taking it not only from a regional level to a national level so quickly. That must have been really so exciting, that groundbreaking moment. I just also wanted to share that you also served on the WCA's national board as Southeast Regional Vice President. You were VP for Chapter Relations from 1998 to 2010, and you were also president of WCA's DC chapter from 1998 to 2001. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those experiences and how they added to this resume?
I was getting my way paid to go to the College Art Association through my job. I would go represent our chapter at the National Chapters Council meetings and go to, to the conference. And then I met people. And why I've stayed in WCA is I love the people I've met, just wonderful, wonderful people, local people that I never would have met, and people all across the country that I still, value so much. And so then somebody twisted my arm and said, well, you could be Southeast, Vice President, and I agreed to do that. That was a fairly small thing. And then one time I went to the national conference, and all the chapter people were sitting around the table. Dean Dresser was the president then, and she says, I said, well, who's leading the meeting? And she says, I don't do it. It's the chapter, the vice president for chapter relations, but we didn't have one. So I started leading the meeting, and guess what? I got to be the vice president for chapter relations, which was fun because I learned about all the different chapters. And being on the board, one thing was going to the national conferences. I can't say I love board meetings, but they're important. But we also had the summer board meeting and traveled all around different places in the country. Like I never would have gone to Missoula, Montana, if it hadn't been for that summer board meeting, but I saw all kinds of places, which were fun. And the College Art Association also used to go to all different cities around the country. They've stopped doing that, which I'm really sad about. But, we were in Texas, we were in Seattle, all these different places for the WCA conference.
So you talked about your interest in the chapters and at these events. You supported the Lifetime Achievement Awards, the 2016 exhibition Impact in DC. You were writing a summary and history of CAA and WCA, yes, helping with the legacy for women artists. And you serve on CAA's committee on women in the arts to try to maintain relationships with the WCA. Can you expand upon that for us about how important these interrelations are, Dr. Wolanin?
Yeah, I do think it's important, that Committee on Women was sort of a separate thing. And then also the Feminist Art Project, even though WCA was a sponsor of it, that sort of developed as a kind of a separate thing, I think, trying to push the feminist agenda more. My interest in women artists and learning about them is connected to WCA, but then I also curated a lot of exhibitions of women artists that were students of the artist I did my dissertation on. I've done a bunch of catalogs and things and exhibitions for women, and juried shows for WCA and other places, of women artists. And so it's been a huge thread in my life. So a lot of my publications, my major publications, have been on men artists, but a lot of the other ones have been focused on women.
Yeah, you did discuss earlier with us about how teaching about women artists before any women were even included in textbooks. It's something we don't think about.
And until very recently, you were lucky if 1 out of 20 things hanging in any museum was by a woman, or not even anybody of color or anything. All of a sudden, the museums have woken up. And for years, there were almost no women museum directors in the whole country. Now, almost every museum in Washington, for example, now has a woman director, and that's happened all across the country. That's just a huge change, but look how many years it's taken. And since, the Women's Caucus, the Guerrilla Girls, everybody was asking for more representation of women in the art world.
Very important. And you mentioned that right now there are more women museum directors, a big change from the past. Many in DC, including the National Gallery of Art, as you mentioned. Also, your role as curator and conservation expert to help restore and preserve art and architecture there at the Capitol, including the photographic and documentary archives. Can you tell us a little bit more about this distinctive position as curator for the architect of the Capitol from 1985 to 2015?
Well, I think if I ever had known I was going to have the job and be in the same office for 30 years, I might never have taken the job, but I was teaching and they couldn't get me on tenure track. I love teaching. And I applied for the job, and then I got in the top 10, and then I got in the top 3. And I was living down in Virginia at James Madison University. All of a sudden, August 9th, they offered me the job. I was supposed to start teaching September 2nd. And I didn't want to let the university down, but a friend of mine, and another art historian in the same field, agreed to interview to take over my teaching. I managed to get moved back, get my kids back in school, and start this new job in September, which was pretty overwhelming. But I was interested in it because of the conservation role. When I went to Oberlin, I almost even thought about majoring in conservation. They had a major then, but it was kind of funny. I'm not very patient, and I'm kind of klutzy, and I didn't think I would be good at it. But I used to teach my students how important it is to know whether the painting you're looking at is genuine, it's clean, it's been retouched a lot, or it's dirty. So that was really interesting to me. And I really, from the beginning, I went to a conference that said curators have to be closely involved with the conservators. You can't just leave them on their own. There's a lot of judgment calls and decisions. So that was really interesting. And my favorite part was climbing up on the scaffold and getting up close to the art and seeing the brush strokes or maybe the underpainting, and trying to help figure out what the best way to conserve the work was, to kind of bring out what the artist was trying to do. So when I was hired, they had already started a conservation program and to conserve Constantino Bermiti's frescoes in the Capitol. And I came and I didn't think he was a very good artist because I didn't know it. All of his paintings had been repainted, and every time they repainted them, they got darker and dirtier. And really, you couldn't see any of his work. And the first big project, we conserved the frieze under the dome and also the huge fresco, 5,000 square feet under the dome of the Capitol. And when they started cleaning that, and I saw these beautiful colors and the beauty of his paintings, and the conservators from Rome that were over consulting kept talking about what a great artist he was, all meaty in the Capitol, which ended up taking me as long as it PhD dissertation. It was like 7 years because I was doing it on top of my job, but I'm very proud of that because I really emphasized the importance of the conservation, but then found out how many documents there were in our archives about what he did that told the story of how each space and room was created, which was so interesting.
That's so fascinating, and we should all purchase the book and take a read because it's so, I'm sure, very detailed.
Well, I didn't get it reprinted, but it is on the Government Printing Office website. You can see it in PDF.
That's wonderful for everyone to know. One of your singular experiences was climbing the Capitol dome. Now, not everyone can say they've done that, Dr. Wolanin. Can you just transport us there for a moment, please?
Well, for the Bermidi fresco, we had a scaffold in the middle of the rotunda that went up to reach the fresco 180 feet above the floor. So there was a little tiny elevator or stick climbing up all the stairs. And then they had a flat platform with rolling scaffolds on top of that to reach all of the curves. So that was really fun to go up and do that. And, other murals that I was in charge of conserving, like at the Library of Congress, there were some big high scaffolds to get up to for the conservators, and also for me to get up and see what was going on up close. So I enjoyed that, and they never asked me if I was afraid of heights when they hired me. So that was it's good that I liked it.
And I must say that was decades ago, and that's also really, really inspiring for so many young women or women of all generations, that you had the courage and the gusto to just get in there and get going. On that note, what significance did the process of restoring the Statue of Freedom hold for you? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, she was my big baby, really. I still, I went up many, many times because we had to conserve her. Even right at the end of my job, I went up there and got my successor to go up there, even though she was scared. She did it. But the statue was up there, and this is 1988. This is soon after I came there. And I asked the Capitol superintendent, is there any way to check the statue when they were painting the dome? He said, no. Well, that wasn't right, because part of what the painters did, they took the lightning points off the head of the statue and sharpened them. So they were up there, and a piece of the bronze fell off. And all of a sudden there was this panic, and the architect says, get it fixed, get it fixed. And I said, no, we need to figure out what's going on with it. And I got a conservator who just by luck happened to be in DC that day to meet with the architect. And, they wouldn't listen to me necessarily, but this expert, they listened to her, and she said, oh, you need a whole conservation and engineering study. So we did that. And then the conclusion was that because there was a big crack in the pedestal under the statue, we had to take the statue off and do the statue down on the ground while the pedestal is being worked on. And it all had to be done during the summer when the weather was good enough. But the nice thing about it is people could see the statue up close while it was being worked on, and right in front of the Capitol. But the scariest part was this whole helicopter business, trying to figure out how you get it off safely. That was pretty terrifying.
Can you share also with us how the events of the 2021 Capitol attack impacted us and or this vast, extensive collection you were in charge of? As an advisor now, how did this uncivil event in American history affect not only the Capitol's art preservation, but our democracy that kept this art collection meaningfully protected?
It was terrifying, and terrifying most of all for our democracy. And I was watching it. And in fact, a New York Times reporter called me, and I just started talking to her. I was terrified with the things they were carrying. They could have slashed paintings or broken statues. And they didn't, because their focus was on other things like killing people and things like that. And so the main damage, as far as I understand, to the art was spraying fire extinguishers, spraying tear gas. And that's something that has to be cleaned off by conservators. So that was a lot. Some graffiti, some damage, but not as much as it could have happened at all. So, but nobody could have stopped them, the way that it went. It was I was terrified. I mean, I've been taking care of those things for 30 years and knew how fragile some of them were.
Are you still actively engaged in organizing the integration of Capitol research and projects with women's art exhibitions, such as the Women's Caucus for Art or other women's art organizations?
Well, I've continued to be active. I've still been, I did a exhibition in, for, as a guest curator in Philadelphia. This was one of my COVID projects that I was working on it a lot remotely with the museum director and the woman who was the widow of the artist who had organized this group of artists in Philadelphia in 1955. And I realized that in 1955, it was pretty amazing. Almost half of the members were women, and their work was being discussed in their forums and looked at and exhibited. And that really sort of excited me. And some of the women in that organization had been students of the man I did my dissertation on, and that I wrote on their work. And they had told me they were very proud of having been in that group, but I never asked them a lot of questions about it. But they were like friends of mine that I stayed with many, many times. And when I got access to the archives that had been saved, one of them, I knew her handwriting so well. She was the first secretary, you know, and she was taking all the notes. So that made it very meaningful to me, my connection with those women. I was working on that exhibition. It was at the Woodmere Art Museum in Philadelphia.
Yes, you had mentioned that you had collaborated with that research team for almost 2 intensive years.
Some of the women, it was hard to even trace. You know, they may have married and changed their names, and then all the archives were closed during COVID. So there were still some mystery women there, but some of the ones that we found did beautiful work, really beautiful work that was in the show, and very much deserved being shown.
And you worked with, I believe, the woman artist who organized the group and who preserved the archives and supported the
She was
financially.
a widow, the younger, the last wife of the artist that organized it. So she was much younger, and he had saved all of the papers and the flyers and the minutes and things like that of the exhibition, even tape recordings of their forums. And of course had a huge number of his paintings. And so a show of his work was part of it too.
That's so great that so much of that was able to be documented,
Yeah.
Dr. Wolanin.
But for me, it's really fun to work on something like that. Like some of these exhibitions, several exhibitions I did were, you know, doing it with another woman. So I did that for the one about the Washington Women's Art Center, this one, and also the 2016 one, Jamie Ann Amakuchi, now Jacobin, who was a young member. I met her when she was in college in WCA. She and I organized the 2016 exhibition, which was one the next time, another 25 years later, the College Art Association was coming to Washington. And I said, we have to do something to recognize the importance of the Lifetime Achievement Awards that were started in Washington. So we managed to do this exhibition with American University Museum. They agreed to give us a whole floor. And we got Leslie King Hammond to be the curator, and Janie Ann designed the book. I wrote things for it and wrote something on all of the artists. And one of the things I did for the exhibition was we couldn't have all the 200 awardees there. You know, there wasn't enough space and there was a limited budget, but we got a lot, you know, a whole group of them, maybe 50 or something. But I wanted people to know about the whole program. So I decided we wanted slides, PowerPoint slides to be shown at the exhibition. And I always think things are going to be easy. That's not easy at all. And each slide, finding the images, trying to distill a woman's whole career down to like 100-some words and do it accurately so we could show the scope of all the awardees. And tried to get some people help me. I tried to get students to help. It wasn't easy. So I ended up retiring earlier than I should have, probably, because I had to have this ready for the February meeting and got it done. And I think they're still using it at the conferences and adding the new people to it. And I'm really proud of that. But that really helped me learn about all these awardees and how amazing they've been. So
that's wonderful. You had already talked to us too about how important intergenerational dialogue is. And you had mentioned in the past, Dr. Wolanin, the importance of bringing in younger members to the WCA organization. How might we create intergenerational dialogue to function as a catalyst toward lasting change, particularly in our organization?
I think for every culture or organization, this is the big challenge. You know, there are a lot of us white-haired people, you know, going to the concerts and going, you know, going to the museums and trying to get young people involved. I've been very pleased with our local chapter, which was just limping along. We got a new president, Kim Foley, who's spoken at some of the conferences, who's wonderful. She got a whole lot of other women excited, younger women. We've got a wonderful diverse board, people really active. I'm sort of the grandmother. I say I'm the grandmother. I can tell them what the precedents are and things I remember. You know, we revised the bylaws finally. I helped with that, but I'm just, you know, really excited that a lot of these younger people have really stepped up, and some of them even have gotten a scholarship program started for our chapter, things like that. But I think it's, you know, it's got to really start on the chapter level, probably getting younger people in, getting them. And I think people in my chapter, once they've gone to a national conference, their whole view of WCA changes, and they're so excited and so glad they went. And some of the ones from my people from my chapter now have gotten on the board, like Sandra Davis. I just love her. She's on the board. I think Deb Walmer, and they've gotten involved in the national level. So it really needs to start, you know, from the chapters.
Absolutely. That organic point is really well taken, that we can, from organic growing from local chapters, move into the national level, which you guys all set so wonderfully as precedent, even as early as the 1970s. You've been willing to share a lot of your personal experiences here today, especially in your role as WCA leadership and so early in the organization's history. This was not only a really insightful conversation, but an extremely inspiring one.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye now.
Welcome. Bye.